There is a place on Earth where the air itself is trying to kill you, where the water carries parasites that dissolve organ tissue, where the soil beneath your feet hides snakes whose venom stops the heart in under 4 minutes, where the trees release toxins that blind you if you touch the wrong bark with an open cut. Scientists who enter the Amazon rainforest for the first time describe the experience the same way: overwhelming, disorienting, and quietly terrifying. Survival experts with decades of wilderness training have entered the Amazon and lasted less than 72 hours before requiring emergency evacuation. And yet, deep inside that same jungle, communities of human beings wake up every morning, feed their children, build their shelters, hunt their food, and go to sleep without a single piece of modern technology. No GPS, no water purification tablets, no emergency beacon, no anti-venom kit. They have been doing this not for years, not for decades, but for thousands of years in an environment that kills trained professionals within days. The question that nobody in the modern world has seriously stopped to ask is this: how? Not in the abstract sense, not the romantic answer about living in harmony with nature. The real answer, the specific, documented, anthropologically verified answer about what these tribes actually do, hour by hour, to survive inside one of the most lethal ecosystems on the planet. What researchers discovered when they finally spent enough time embedded with Amazon tribes changed the way several fields of biology, medicine, and survival science understood human adaptation. What they found was not primitive instinct. It was not luck. It was not myth. What they found was a system, layered, precise, passed down through generations with the same rigor that a university passes down engineering knowledge. Except this system was refined not over 4 years of study, but over 4,000 years of consequence. Get it wrong once in the Amazon, and you do not get a second chance. The Yanomami, who inhabit the border region between Brazil and Venezuela, across an area of approximately 9 million hectares, have developed what anthropologists describe as one of the most sophisticated environmental reading systems ever documented in a non-literate society. They do not carry maps. They do not need them. Every senior hunter in a Yanomami community carries an internal spatial model of their territory, so precise that researchers from the Brazilian National Institute for Amazon Research documented cases where hunters navigated back to their village from distances exceeding 40 kilometers through dense canopy with no visible landmarks, no stars, and no trail, arriving within minutes of their estimated time. This is not extraordinary to them. This is Tuesday. The navigation system they use is built on what ethnobotanists call ecological triangulation, the simultaneous reading of wind direction, canopy density, water flow patterns, animal sound distribution, and subtle changes in soil composition underfoot. A Yanomami hunter does not look at a single sign. He reads dozens of signs simultaneously, the way a trained musician reads an entire score rather than one note at a time. The difference is that this skill is not learned in a classroom. It is learned by walking the jungle from the age of 4, failing, being corrected, and walking again. Modern survival training programs in the United States military have studied this approach. The conclusion reached by researchers consulting with the U.S. Army Research Institute of Environmental Medicine was uncomfortable but clear. The environmental awareness developed by Amazon tribes through generational immersion cannot be replicated through training programs of any length when started in adulthood. The neurological adaptation required begins too early. The window, they found, is essentially childhood. What the modern world calls a survival skill, these tribes call ordinary life. And navigation is only the beginning. Because before a Yanomami hunter moves a single step into the deep jungle, before he makes a single decision about direction or distance, he has already done something that no survival manual in print today adequately explains. He has read the jungle around him for signs of what it is about to do. Not what it looks like, what it is about to do. That distinction is the difference between coming home and not coming home. The Amazon does not present danger the way most environments do. It does not announce itself. There is no open terrain where a predator becomes visible from a distance. There is no clear sky where weather can be read an hour in advance. Everything in the Amazon happens close, fast, and without warning, unless you know what to look for before the warning becomes irrelevant. The Matses people who live along the Javari River Valley in the westernmost region of the Brazilian Amazon near the Peruvian border have developed a pre-movement assessment protocol that anthropologists spent nearly a decade trying to fully document. Before any hunter leaves the perimeter of the village, he performs what the Matses call a reading that has no direct translation in English, but has been described by linguist and anthropologist Harriet Minks, who spent 3 years living with the community, as something closest to environmental diagnosis. The hunter observes the behavior of specific bird species whose calls shift in pattern when a large predator has moved through the area within the previous 2 hours. He reads the movement of leafcutter ant columns, which change direction when ground moisture levels indicate a flash flooding event forming upstream. He checks the underside of specific broadleaf plants for the presence of a particular fungal growth that appears only when atmospheric pressure has dropped to levels that precede violent afternoon storms. Storms that can transform a navigable river crossing into a death trap in under 20 minutes. None of this is written down. None of it is taught through formal instruction. It is transmitted through observation, through proximity to experienced hunters, through thousands of hours of exposure that begins before a child can articulate what they are learning. Researchers from the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology, who studied knowledge transmission among Amazon tribes, published findings in 2019, noting that the volume of environmental information carried by an adult hunter in these communities exceeds what current cognitive science can fully account for using standard models of human memory. The information is not stored the way textbook knowledge is stored. It appears to be embedded in perception itself. Then there is the question of water. Every survival training program in the world addresses water procurement as a primary concern. The standard advice: find moving water, avoid stagnant sources, purify before drinking, is correct as far as it goes. But in the Amazon, it does not go nearly far enough. The river systems that appear on maps as sources of fresh water carry a biological load that would defeat most standard purification methods available to civilian survivalists. The organisms present in Amazon river water include strains of leptospirobacteria, multiple species of intestinal parasites, and in certain tributary systems, the larvae of parasitic worms that penetrate skin on contact, making even wading dangerous without knowing which specific waterways are safe at which specific times of year. Amazon tribes do not drink from rivers indiscriminately. The knowledge of which water sources are safe, during which seasons, at which points along a waterway, and how to treat water from marginal sources using specific plant materials one of the most carefully preserved bodies of knowledge in these communities. The Kayapo people of the Xingu River Basin use a combination of crushed seeds from the copaiba tree and the inner bark of the kumaru tree to treat water from sources they consider borderline, a process that was analyzed by researchers at the University of São Paulo in 2014, who found it reduced bacterial load in test samples by levels comparable to basic commercial filtration tablets. The Kayapo did not discover this through experimentation in the modern sense. They discovered it the way all generational knowledge is discovered, through accumulated observation, through illness and recovery, through deaths that taught the living what not to do, refined across generations until what remained was only what worked. It is worth sitting with that for a moment. Every technique these tribes use that appears from the outside to be cultural tradition or spiritual practice was at some point a response to failure. Someone died. Someone got sick. Someone did not come home. And the community adjusted. Over thousands of years, the adjustments that kept people alive stayed. The adjustments that did not were buried with the people who tried them. What survived is not superstition. What survived is engineering. Of all the survival challenges the Amazon presents, none has been more consistently misunderstood by the outside world than the question of plants, specifically the question of which plants will feed you and which plants will kill you, and how Amazon tribes navigate that distinction in an environment containing an estimated 40,000 plant species, hundreds of which are toxic, dozens of which are lethal in small quantities, and some of which look nearly identical to species that are safe to eat. The standard assumption is that indigenous knowledge about plants is a kind of inherited instinct, that these tribes simply grew up around certain plants and learned by watching animals eat them. Primatologist and ethnobotanist Paul Allen Cox, writing in the journal Economic Botany, described this assumption as one of the most persistent and most incorrect ideas in Western interpretations of indigenous knowledge. Animals, he noted, make frequent errors in plant selection. Animal behavior is not a reliable guide to human edibility, and the idea that this knowledge is intuitive dramatically underestimates the complexity of what is actually happening. What is actually happening is classification, systematic, generational, empirically derived classification of plant properties that in many cases preceded Western botanical science by centuries and, in some areas, identified medicinal compounds that Western pharmacology did not isolate until the 20th century. The Waorani people of the Ecuadorian Amazon, one of the last groups to make sustained contact with the outside world, with first documented peaceful contact occurring only in 1958, maintain an oral botanical taxonomy that researchers from the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew estimated, after consultation sessions with tribal elders, encompasses knowledge of over 2,000 plant species, including their growth patterns, seasonal variations in toxicity, preparation methods that neutralize certain toxic compounds while preserving nutritional value, and medicinal applications for over 300 species. One specific example documented by ethnobotanist Glenn Shepard during field research with the Matsiguenca people in Peru illustrates the precision involved. A particular palm species found throughout the western Amazon produces fruit that is nutritious and safe to eat during one specific window of ripeness, approximately 4 to 6 days, but contains a concentrated alkaloid compound in both the unripe and overripe stages that causes severe neurological symptoms in humans. The difference between safe and dangerous fruit on this palm is not obvious to the untrained eye. It requires knowing what to look for at the stem attachment point, the specific color shift that occurs on the underside of the fruit cluster, and the texture change in the outer skin that precedes the visible color change by approximately 24 hours. Warani children learn to identify this window before they are 8 years old. The construction of shelter follows the same principle. Not instinct, not guesswork, but accumulated precision. A temporary shelter built by an experienced Yanomami hunter can be completed in under 2 hours using materials collected within a 50-meter radius, requires no tools beyond what can be fashioned on site, and provides thermal protection, rain deflection, and elevation off the jungle floor, sufficient for multiple nights. Researchers who have replicated the process under instruction have consistently found that the structural efficiency of these shelters, the ratio of protection provided to materials and time invested, exceeds anything produced by standard military field shelter protocols. The elevation is not incidental. Sleeping on the jungle floor in the Amazon exposes a person to ground-level insects, ground-level reptiles, and ground-level humidity that accelerates hypothermia, even in equatorial temperatures. The specific height used by Amazon tribes for sleeping platforms, typically between 60 and 90 centimeters, was not chosen arbitrarily. It sits above the primary movement corridor of the majority of venomous ground species while remaining low enough to be structurally stable, using materials available in the immediate environment. Every measurement, in other words, is a solution to a problem that was learned the hard way. There is a concept in Western survival training called the will to survive, the psychological dimension of endurance that determines whether a person continues to function or collapses under extreme stress. It is discussed in military training programs, wilderness survival courses, and disaster preparedness literature as something that can be cultivated through mindset exercises, breathing techniques, and mental rehearsal. Amazon tribes do not have a term for it, not because the concept is foreign to them, but because for them it is not a special condition activated under stress. It is the baseline. The ordinary state of being alive in the Amazon requires a continuous, low-level engagement with risk that over generations has produced communities whose psychological relationship with danger is fundamentally different from anything the modern world experiences. Anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro, who spent years conducting fieldwork with Amazonian groups, and whose theoretical work on Amerindian perspectivism became one of the most cited contributions to social anthropology of the late 20th century, described this relationship as one in which the boundary between safety and danger is not experienced as a wall to stay behind, but as a terrain to be navigated constantly, skillfully, and without the luxury of surprise. What this means practically is that Amazon tribes do not panic in the way that untrained individuals panic in wilderness emergencies. The physiological stress response is present, but the behavioral collapse that accompanies it in people without environmental training does not occur at the same threshold. Studies conducted by researchers at the Federal University of Pará examining stress responses in indigenous versus non-indigenous participants in controlled environmental challenge scenarios found statistically significant differences in decision-making quality under acute stress. Differences the researchers attributed not to genetic variation, but to lifelong environmental exposure beginning in early childhood. The jungle, in other words, does not frighten them the way it frightens everyone else. And that single difference, psychological calibration built over a lifetime of real exposure, may be the most important survival technology they possess, because every other skill, every botanical classification, every navigation technique, every water assessment protocol, every shelter construction method requires the practitioner to remain functional under conditions that would incapacitate most modern humans before those skills could even be applied. This is the part that no survival manual can teach, and it is the part that the outside world has most consistently failed to understand when looking at Amazon tribes. The assumption has always been that these communities survive despite the Amazon, that they endure it, that they tolerate it the way a person tolerates a hostile climate, with difficulty, with suffering, with the hope that something better exists elsewhere. The reality documented by researchers who have spent serious time inside these communities tells a different story. The Amazon is not what they endure. The Amazon is what they know. Every creek, every canopy layer, every seasonal shift in animal behavior, every change in wind that signals weather 3 hours away, it is not a threat to be managed. It is a language they were born into, taught from childhood, and have spoken fluently for thousands of years. 500 years of contact with the outside world brought these communities disease, displacement, violence, and the systematic destruction of their territories. What it did not bring, what it has never been able to bring, is a survival system that performs better in that specific environment than the one they already had. Modern survival technology is extraordinary in the environments it was designed for. GPS works beautifully when satellites are overhead. Water purification tablets work when you have them. Anti-venom works when you can reach a hospital. Emergency beacons work when someone is coming to find you. In the deep Amazon, none of those conditions reliably apply. What applies is what has always applied. Knowledge refined across generations by people who had no margin for error and no option to leave. The jungle does not forgive mistakes. These tribes have made almost none.